It's time for me to move away from the game of basketball.
Westbrook stops at the 1 and goes down to a knee.
Bitter labor dispute caused the cancellation of the playoffs.
You don't know when he's going to be back. Two really serious concussions.
Hello and welcome back to How To Fantasy Sports. In today's video, what we're going to look at is our drafting strategy for the 2012 fantasy football season. We'll take a look at some of the current trends and strategies that you might want to use for your draft. We'll take a look at the player positions and how we're drafting those positions. And then we'll also take a look at our drafting and how our position in the draft will dictate the players that we take and when we take them. First, review your league settings. It's very important that you understand how your players accumulate points and how many players that you're going to have to take at each of the positions in your league. Now, what we're going to be talking about here is for your standard 10 to 12 team league. But we'll also give you some ideas on how you can modify this information for use in any league of any size. Now, there is no magic drafting bullet that can guarantee 100% success. Any drafting strategy with the right combination of luck and skill has the ability to succeed. I have been in a draft where someone has spent $30 of their $200 auction dollars on a kicker in the first round. There is not a single person who would endorse this strategy, but the person was A, very cocky, and B, knew that they had value that they could find in the later rounds to overcome doing such a horrible thing as spending $30 on a kicker in the first round. And you know what? They ended up the regular season with the most points in the league. They did lose in the semifinals, but they still put together a very high quality team. So what is the lesson that we can learn from this? Well, again, any strategy can work, even one as odd as that one. Again, no one would endorse this strategy. And that what we're going to try to accomplish here is show you how to minimize the risk in your drafting strategy so that you don't have to rely on luck as much in your draft. In general, the NFL has become a lot more pass heavy over the past couple of years, and this has been great for your quarterbacks and your wide receivers, and even to a lesser degree your tight ends, who's become a lot more of a focal point in some teams' offensive strategies. So, knowing this type of information, how do we draft the different types of positions in our league, and what type of emphasis do we place on them? For quarterbacks, with the rise in the passing game, what we've actually seen is also a rise in the number of quality fantasy options that we have for us at the quarterback position. In your standard 10 to 12 team league to draft only one quarterback, we can find pretty good values even late in the draft to fill our quarterback spot. Now, there are still two very good stud options in Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers at the top of the quarterback rankings. And these two are going pretty consistently in the first round. So if you're looking at getting one of these two quarterbacks on your team, you're going to have to target them in the first round. But if you aren't specifically targeting them, you do have enough depth in the quarterback position that you can wait until the late rounds to pick up one of the lower ranked quarterbacks and find the value in some of the other positions in the early rounds. However, if you do play in a league that drafts beyond the top 12 quarterbacks in your league, then you'll probably want to move quarterbacks up in your overall rankings and put a little bit more emphasis on them. Because once you get past those top 12, 13 quarterbacks, there is a little bit of a cliff there in terms of consistency and points that they're going to provide us during the fantasy season. And you'll want to avoid drafting into that cliff. For running backs, what we've seen over the last few years is this emergence of what we call running back by committees. That is, teams are utilizing multiple running backs with different skill sets in different situations. Now, what this has effectively done is it's actually increased the number of fantasy relevant running backs that we have to consider for drafting on our team. And it's also watered down the effect between running backs in that you probably won't find that there's a great spread between running backs at the end of the season, aside from a few 3-down backs that aren't part of these running back by committees. However, as we're seeing an increase in the number of running backs that are touching the ball, we're also seeing an increase in the number of injuries to running backs during the season. And what this has meant is that the running back position is actually becoming one of the easiest positions to manage in season, as new running back options seem to be coming up on the waiver wire every single week. Now, some options are obviously better than other options, but it just means that you don't need to have the best running backs coming out of your draft, in that the best running backs at the beginning of your season probably won't necessarily be around at the end of the season. And there's no guarantees with injuries to either your running backs or someone else's running backs that there won't be better options for your team at the end of the season. In fact, it is a great drafting strategy to pick up backup running backs at the end of your draft, knowing that if there's an injury to the starter, that your backup running back now becomes the starter, and they won't even be in a running back by committee either. So they have a real chance to have a strong fantasy season once the starter goes down with an injury. For wide receivers, this new emphasis on the passing game has also meant that there are a lot more wide receiver options for us in the fantasy game. It is a much deeper category than it ever was before. And unless you're in a league that really drafts a lot of wide receivers, you probably won't find yourself that stuck for good options on draft day. Now, that being said, we still feel like the wide receiver position is the position that you want to target, and target early in your drafts. The reason for this is because the wide receiver position is a tough position to manage for injuries during your season, and you don't really find that there are a lot of great options at wide receiver that come up during the season. In fact, the stars that you'll draft at the beginning of the year are usually the ones that you carry throughout the whole season, unless they really fail miserably in their production this year, or they get injured, or are just not playing for whatever reason. So it's very important then that if you're going to have to stick with these wide receivers, that you stick with the best ones out there. Plus, because the pool is so deep now, what you actually find is that receivers are having good games and then very bad games. They're not very consistent from game to game to game. So what you really want to target at the beginning of your drafts is getting a wide receiver that consistently performs from game to game to game, and getting a high amount of targets from their quarterback. You'll find that you get a lot more value out of those during the course of the season. For tight ends, this new emphasis on the passing game has meant that this position has become much more fantasy relevant than it has in the past. But because most leagues don't really draft that many tight ends, it's still not really a position that we really need to worry about all that much. Now, over the last year, Jimmy Graham and Rob Gronkowski have obviously separated themselves from the pack in terms of quality tight ends. But after that, there's so much depth in that category, and there's not really a lot of difference between those higher ranked tight ends from the lower ranked tight ends, that you really need to worry about placing a lot of emphasis on picking one up early in your draft. Now, if you want Rob or if you want Jimmy, you're going to have to go after them really early in your draft. And because they are statistically better than the rest of the people in the tight end category, there are some advantages to picking them up early. It's not a bad strategy, but just know that if you do miss those two, you really have a lot of options after that, and there's no real need to rush into the tight end category. For kickers and defenses, please just leave them until the very end of your draft. There's just no reason to take them any earlier in your draft. At the end of the year, the difference between your highest ranked defense and kicker won't be that great from your, say, 10th ranked or even your 15th ranked player in that position. Plus, it's very hard to forecast these two positions and which ones are going to be successful and which ones aren't going to be successful. So there's just no real advantage to be gained by taking them any earlier than the back end of your draft. In fact, you can choose not to draft them at all. pick up more running backs, pick up more wide receivers, stockpile these positions that as we go through the preseason, are still coming down with injuries, and you never know. The team that you draft might not be healthy enough at the beginning of the season to start for your team. So by not drafting your kicker and your defense, you can stockpile more options that you can use for week 1. And once week 1 comes around, just simply drop the 2 people that you think are the least valuable to your team and pick up your kicker and your defense then. So in general, we're recommending 2 drafting strategies that you want to consider depending on the type of players that you want on your team. If you really like those highly ranked quarterbacks and tight ends, the Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, or the Jimmy Graham and Rob Gronkowski, you have to target them in the first round, and that's fine. You do get a good statistical advantage over your opponents by taking these people early. But after that, what you'll want to do is you'll want to focus on taking 2 wide receivers and a running back with your next picks. If you don't want to take those players, or if you get a drafting position where you can't take those players, what we recommend is for your first 3 picks, you should take a dependable running back and 2 high target wide receivers. And then your 2 picks after that should be another running back or wide receiver and your quarterback, depending on how far down into the quarterback position your draft has been drafting. And there you go, the foundations for a very good fantasy football team. In our later videos, we'll take a look at the rankings for each of these positions so that you'll know which players to fill which of the roles that we're talking about in this video. If you have any questions, send us an email at question@howtofantasysports.com. Otherwise, stay tuned for more videos. Thanks for watching.
It's time for me to move away from the game of basketball.
Westbrook stops at the 1 and goes down to a knee.
Bitter labor dispute caused the cancellation of the playoffs.
You don't know when he's going to be back. 2 really serious concussions.